My name is Thomas, and although 2 years have passed, I still struggle to explain what happened without feeling that quiet pull of dread creep up my spine. It's not the kind of horror that bursts into your life, but the kind that settles slowly, like fog seeping under a door. This story began shortly after my divorce. I moved to a small town in northern Oregon. I didn't choose the place for its beauty or culture. I chose it because it felt untouched, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. It felt heavy, as if the silence itself had weight. The first thing I truly noticed in that neighborhood was the house directly across from mine. It belonged to an elderly woman named Martha Allen. Her home was simply too large for her. It was built for a family of 5, 2 floors, a wide porch, and long corridors you could easily get lost in. Yet, it was occupied by one blind woman who moved through it slowly, cautiously, almost reverently. Every evening at 5 o'clock, she would step out onto her porch and stand, her hand resting lightly on the railing. She never looked around. Of course she couldn't. But she would tilt her head slightly, as though she were listening for something very specific. Not birds, not cars, not wind. She was listening for patterns that only she understood. It was much later that I learned she'd been completely blind for 23 years, long enough to forget what light even looked like. But her house, something about it bothered me from the start. It was too still, not peacefully still, it was empty still. Windows where the curtains never moved, rooms that seemed untouched, and corners where sound seemed to die instantly, as if intentionally swallowed. At night, especially when the fog rolled in from the river, I sometimes heard footsteps from her second floor. The steps were slow, deliberate. It wasn't the random creaking of old wood. It was the soft, weight-shifted cadence of a person desperately trying not to be heard. Everyone I mentioned it to said the same thing: old houses settle. But old houses don't settle with human rhythm. One afternoon, Martha asked if I could replace a smoke detector battery upstairs. I agreed partly out of pity, but also because curiosity had been gnawing at me. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old books, like a museum someone had forgotten to close. Dust clung to the corners, yet everything was neat. Every object seemed to be placed by memory rather than by sight. The second floor was dimmer than it should have been during the day. Thick, dusty curtains blocked most of the light, turning the hallway into a long, muted tunnel. As I walked down it, one curtain suddenly fluttered, not like a breeze caught it, but as if something had just moved behind it. I froze, listened, waited. Silence, a perfect, calculated silence. I dismissed it as nerves and continued until I reached a small storage closet. Its door was slightly ajar. A cold, stale draft seeped out, sharp and acrid, like the smell of an attic that hadn't been entered in years. I closed the door gently, the latch clicked. And in that moment, I felt something warm crawl across my skin, not physically, but intuitively. It felt like I had just disturbed something alive that was right behind that door. Over the next week, Martha started complaining about small, strange things. A chair had somehow been scraped a few inches out of place. Dry goods were missing, doors were left ajar, even though she swore she had closed them. She laughed it off, but her laugh was thin and uncertain. I carefully asked if she was certain she lived alone. She stopped smiling. Her blind eyes focused somewhere just past me, as if she were staring at something I couldn't see. Of course I live alone, she said, but her voice wavered. Martha had lived blind for so long that the world had turned into an ocean of ambiguous sounds. A house settling, a vent clicking, a mouse in the wall, or a person breathing behind her, it all blended into the same category for her, unidentified noise. She didn't trust her ears anymore, not fully. That night at 2 a.m., I woke to a scraping sound, furniture being dragged across her floor slowly, purposefully. And then sudden, absolute silence. A silence so sharp it cut through the fog outside. No settling house can freeze like that, as if an intelligent creature has just stopped, waiting to hear if it's been noticed. The following Sunday, when Martha left for church, I finally surrendered to the dread gnawing inside me. I crossed the street and went into her house. I wish I could say I hesitated. I didn't. The second floor felt even colder, the kind of cold that comes from stagnant, enclosed spaces, not the weather. The closet door was open again, wide open. Inside, behind a stack of dusty boxes, I saw something impossible, a hidden space carved directly into the wall. A narrow gap leading deeper into the structure. It was wide enough for a person, a thin person, someone who was used to maneuvering in places not meant for human bodies. The smell hit me next, damp sweat, soaked fabric, and the sour musk of unwashed skin. On the floor were footprints, bare, thin, soled, recent. I leaned closer. That's when I heard it, a slow, hollow inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. Someone was in the walls, and they weren't surprised to hear me, only curious. Someone had been living in Martha's house, not hiding in a room or an attic. He was living inside the walls, using the cavities between the structural beams as hallways. Sleeping during the day, moving at night, eating her supplies, observing her through vents and cracks that she, being blind, would never notice. Martha had become a natural part of his environment, predictable, non-threatening, blind, the perfect target. I wanted to call the police immediately, but first I needed to ensure Martha was safe. I intended to tell her everything that afternoon. But instead she came to me. She knocked on my door, trembling. She said she felt someone in her hallway the night before. Not because she heard anything, but because the air shifted next to her. The way it shifts when someone stands too close. He was getting bolder. Pause. I told her I would call an inspector. I just didn't dare tell her the truth. When she left, a terrifying realization sank in. The man in the walls didn't consider himself a trespasser. He had roots there, a routine. To him, Martha wasn't the homeowner. She was just another occupant, one who happened to be easy to navigate around. At 3 a.m., I woke to a sound that still paralyzes me when I think about it, a door creaking open, slow, uneven, deliberate. I looked across the street. Martha stood barefoot on her porch in her nightgown, tilting her head like she was trying to identify some strange, distant noise. But it wasn't distant. It was right behind her. He stepped out from the shadows of her home, tall, pale, hair wild and matted, barefoot, with a thin frame that looked starved of sunlight and normal life. He moved like someone who had spent years navigating cramped spaces, smooth, silent, practiced. He approached her until he stood directly behind her. She whispered into the darkness, asking if anyone was there. He didn't answer. He simply inhaled deeply behind her, as if memorizing her scent. She froze, she felt it, the shift of air, but she didn't understand. She stepped back right into him. He caught her gently, not like an attacker, but like someone steadying a roommate. Someone who believed he belonged there. My stomach twisted. This wasn't fear to him. This was routine. He guided her back inside the house, not dragging, not forcing, just quietly directing her with an intimate, horrifying familiarity that made my skin crawl. I called the police. They arrived in minutes, but he was gone. Inside the wall cavity, they discovered a thin blanket, empty canned food, a cheap flashlight, water bottles refilled from her tap, a cracked phone with no service, and a notebook filled with incoherent scribbles, diagrams of vents and hallways, and fragmented sentences like "she doesn't know," and "night is safer." He had lived there for years. Night was his world, daytime was sleep, the walls were his home, Martha was his silent companion. Her daughter took her in. Martha never returned to that house again. He was never found. The police assumed he fled into the woods, but there were other possibilities, ones I never voiced. Possibilities involving other homes, with other walls, other blind corners, and other vulnerable people. I moved away 2 weeks later. My new apartment felt bright, friendly, thin walls, neighbors I saw every day. Nothing like that isolated Oregon street. But late at night, when everything settles, when the heater clicks off, when my building grows still. Sometimes I hear it, a slow breath behind the drywall, measured, patient, experienced. Not loud, not threatening, just aware. Like someone who has lived inside walls long enough to know exactly how quiet they need to be.